Now let's see about actually validating this data. So we've already got set up here receipt.php. Receipt.php has a basic kind of page structure here. I've already filled in all the details. Let's go ahead and put this in here. PHP data validation is really what we're doing here. Everything else seems to be filled in nicely. And what we're going to do now, let's go ahead and bring up that file. Because it's not named index.html or index.php, you have to actually put its name in there. So let's do that. And here's all we're seeing at this current point in time, and that's exactly what we expect. I want right here in the middle to go into PHP mode and then fill in the basic logic here. And this is where I'm going to go through those basic steps I recommended before. So, was the expected method used? Were the expected keys sent? And are the values valid? That's what we need to do. So, what was the expected method? In our case, it's post. So the first thing we can do here is check if that was used. So check the request method. Now there's lots of different ways that you could check this. I find the simplest approach, without having to think too much about it, is there anything in the particular array I'm expecting it in? All of the data will either be in get, if they use the get approach, or it will be in post. I want them to use post. So if, and then the function is empty. If empty, and then $_post, then that means they did not use the post method. It would not be empty if they had used it. So we can just output an error. Let's actually do it like this. I am going to, at this point, go into a big echo block. So I'm going to say echo 1, 2, 3, end of text, EOT. And then I would go through and generate my output. I'm going to go ahead and put in the actual end of text here. Remember, this has to be on the very start of the line. Nothing else can be on it. So let's give ourselves a big old block right here. And let's output just a basic warning. So I'm going to say div class equals, let's see, panel, excuse me, I need a quote on there, panel, and then panel warning. And then we'll do another div, class equals panel header, and let's say error. And then finally div, and the class on this should equal panel body. And here's where we would say, let's put it in a P, incorrect HTTP method used. Please use post only. There we go. It might be a little bit more than you'd want to give the average user, but for now we'll be a little bit more verbose with our response. And there we go. Well, let's see here. I didn't do something quite right. Let's take a look at how panel is structured. Panel heading, panel body, panel default. So we have class panel, panel warning, and we'll make sure that's right. And then div class equals panel header. That should be working. There's warning. Oh, it should be panel heading. There we go, that's better. Error, incorrect HTTP method used. Please use post only. There we go. So that gives us some nice feedback. Before I go any further, I want to show you one last way that you can actually get a whole bunch of just HTTP text out, or excuse me, HTML text output into the body. This was something that I didn't mention last time just because I didn't want to throw another option out there and create confusion, but it's actually probably the most preferable way. Basically, you can close your PHP tag at any time you want. So I could just decide to close it right here. By doing that, I've now left the PHP context, And the rest of this will just be output exactly as I provided it. When I'm done and want to go back into the PHP context, well, I start another PHP tag. Now, I always find this is a little bit confusing for some students, so I always don't necessarily want to force this on you. I do want to say, though, that it is by far the best way when you have a big chunk of HTML you need to output, and there's really no consideration about variables or any PHP computation that needs to happen. Just get out of PHP mode and back into HTML mode. It will highlight it better. It will help you do more lookup as you're typing into things. It's definitely the path of least resistance, and so you might find this to be the most desirable way to go through it. You might also, though, find it confusing to keep jumping in PHP land and then out of it and then back into it again. I'm generally going to use this because it is the best way to do it, but feel free to stick with the here now or the here doc or now doc modes if you find this confusing. So at this point now, we're able to output an error if they used the wrong method. And currently right now, they did because we actually didn't, we're just triggering this with the, with the browser, and the browser does not do anything other than get. Now basically, if they didn't use this, this is an unrecoverable error. We're not going to do anything else. And what might be the best thing to do at this point would be to just jump ship and stop executing any of the rest of the page. We can do that. There's a function called die. And the die keyword basically says stop, don't go any further. And you can also include some kind of message in here if you wanted to. Please understand that once that hits the word die, no more execution is going to happen at all. It will not continue on and do anything left. You will see people using this fairly frequently. Generally, if you're actually generating an HTML response, it's not a good idea because you can't finish up and close up your tags and provide the rest of the page. I'm going to just go ahead and call it here and you'll see what happens. The rest of the page is now gone. It's still able to render this fairly okay. It recovers and figures it out, but it's not a good idea. So instead, really the best thing we could do here is just create an else clause. If post is not empty, then we're able to move on, and everything else will happen here. So this is sort of taking care of our very first step. Was the expected method used? The next thing we do is we start examining if we've received all the information that we should have. So let's check and extract submitted data. So we would want to check a few basic things. If one of the first ones that we know we have to check that could potentially not be there, let's actually back up a notch here, is the vehicle make. And so that comes through with the key value make, not surprisingly, but we've seen if they stick with the default values of the form without anything put into there, it will in fact not be defined at all. So we should check. The way we do this is with the isSet function. If is set, and then we would go into the post array and tell it which thing we want to check if it's set. And so we would check for make. Here, we're concerned with the fact that it's not set. So if not is set make, then this is another error case. We cannot proceed if they didn't provide us with a make. So again, we'll output a warning or error in this case to them. So we'll say error make is required. Please resubmit your order. So this would allow us to recognize that they did not specify make here. Now, all of a sudden, I've got some duplicated code. This is one sort of alarm that goes off in my head. It's like, oh, look at this. We've got something that we're doing fairly commonly. Why don't we actually make this a little bit more modular? Whenever I'm defining functions that I'd like to use throughout the page, I like to go up and sort of define them in the header. You can technically define them anywhere you want. I have duplicated code. That means I really should be using a function. Let's do that. So I'm going to come up here. Actually, even a better place to put them is at the very top. Let's do that. PHP. So we'll go into PHP land before we've even put out the doc type. And we'll define a function. Function output error. Only thing we really need to know is, let's go ahead and take in a title. We've got to do it with a $sign because these are variables. We'll say heading, and then we'll take in an actual message. And then what we want to do right here is, in fact, output this same thing that we've done before. So let's just grab this, including the getting in and out of PHP. And what we want it to do is basically run that little bit of code right there and output it. I'm going to bring this over here so that it's just right off the edge. Just tabbed in once. Again, tabs get weird in this world. And what we're going to want to do is right in the middle here, I need to output that heading. So I'm going to say the shorthand tag of heading equals close, or no, question mark close. And then I need to output the message as well. And that is going to go right down here inside the panel body. This gives me an easy function to call anytime I need to send out a warning message of some sort. It will output an error. Down here, how do I actually use this? Well, I don't need all of this anymore. What I'm going to do is just, if the post was not there, I'm going to call output error. Our heading will be error. Let's follow my own rules here. I'm going to do this with double quotes. And then our message will be, what did we say? Incorrect request method. Please use post only. So there we go. Then I can do a similar thing down here. I'm going to say output error. Again, we'll say error. And we'll say make, let's do it like this. Make is required. Please resubmit your order. So we're making certain that they specified make. We're doing it here now with a function call, and the duplicated code is gone. The same code is used up here with a couple parameters that get filled in when we call the function. All right, now we've gone through, we've checked those few things. Is there anything else we'd want to check to make sure that it was in fact submitted? So were the expected keys sent? This is the only one that's really, we're in danger of not being sent. Vehicle style will always be sent because we've done it here with the select box. Nonetheless, we still want to make sure it's there because, again, they could completely circumvent this form and send it any way they want. And if we didn't have the style, we'd be in trouble. So let's make sure it's there as well. We'll just tack this on right here. If not is set make, or not is set $_post, and this one's called model. So now we'll change this. Make and model are required. Please resubmit your order. Now with that being said, we'd be ready, if both of those are there, to go on and actually extract the data. So here we're just checking the data. Let's change it to that. This is something that often happens. You're starting to chain a bunch of if and else's together. If you recognize that that's happening, they probably belong in else if statements, and that's definitely the case here. So I'm going to make this an else if instead, so that we've just got our first check, did they use the right method? And then here, check that required data was provided. So we're making sure the required fields are there. I'm going to put this on its own line so that it looks a little more reasonable. There we go. So first we check the request method, then else if it did pass the request method, we check that the data was provided. Else process data. So those are our basic checks. Now, we've done everything except checking that the values are valid. And that's going to happen in this last step here when we're processing the data. Let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to now, we'll just temporarily put in one more output error call right here. This is one too far in. And we'll say, this is just a temporary thing. We're not going to leave this here. We'll say ready to process data here as sort of a last step. So you see those three things. Again, I'm just doing this so that we can check it. Also, it's high time we came back to this form and made sure it's sent to the right place. We had it going to params. Now we should change it to go to receipt.php. So now, when I submit this order, let's see what happens. We come over here, we click Submit Order. It goes to receipt and it gives it some data. It did give it some post data. There was some in there, but it wasn't the correct one because we had left make empty. And so it says make and model are required. Please resubmit your order. We can just hit the back button to get back there. Let's actually give it a make, like Chevrolet. Minivan's already been selected. There's no easy way to make that not be in there. Submit the order. There we go. Success. Ready to process data. Again, that's just temporary. We just wanted to see something, so we knew that that was working. All right. So things are well on their way here. We're making good progress. Now let's see about actually processing this data. So we'll take out the output error here. Let's extract data from post. Here I just want to pull the data out into easy to use variables. So we'll say var make equals $_post make. And I know for certain that that is there because I've already checked. I made sure that make was set. And then I've already done the same thing with model. So here I'll do the same thing. Model, I'm going to check that model is actually there. Or excuse me, not check that it's actually there. I've already checked that it's there. I'm just going to go ahead and pull it out into a variable that's easy to use. Now, you don't have to do this. And look at me, I'm writing JavaScript here. No var. We just put it right into make and model. You'll catch yourself doing that too, I'm sure. So I'm putting them out in variables just for convenience. I could, in fact, just refer to them directly in the post array. I feel the code looks a little bit better if you have them out in their individual variables. Now, what's the last thing that could happen here? Well, we could also get some optional options, yeah. Let's pull that out as well. Now, here's the key thing to note. We didn't check that options was actually set. It might not be. If that happens, this will basically get set to null, empty, nothing. And if that's the case, we'll be able to deal with that later. For right now, we'll just go ahead and try to pull it out, and the variable options will be whatever it needs to be, and we'll deal with that when the time comes. Our job now is to generate some sort of receipt, and I want to display that to them. So first of all, let's display the vehicle make and model with a base price. Don't do that. What we need to do here is take a look and build a string that is the make and the model. I'm going to echo out, this is going to be a little bit of text, so echo makes sense. I'm going to echo out, let's make it like an H3, and let's put in the make and the model directly here, and just see what they look like. And then in addition, we'll also want to put in some sort of base price. So we'll probably want also in there, let's say like an H4, some sort of price. I'm just going to put price there right now because we don't have it handy yet. So there we go. Let's save those things and let's submit. I'm going to put some selections in here and then submit. There we go, Chevy minivan. Now, one thing that's important to note here is that these will be exactly equal to the values you specified over here. So we specified what? We specified Ford, Chevy, and VW. Those are reasonable things, but they're really not intended for viewing because they're not formatted quite the same way. You could just sort of decide for yourself if you want to make these a little bit more viewer-friendly. Why don't we do that? We'll say Ford, Chevrolet, and Volkswagen. This makes them basically exactly the same as their labels were. This is really the only way you're going to be able to get to it. All of the other information is going to have been lost on the server. Only the client's aware of, say, the text that's right here. So make sure you make the value be whatever in particular thing you want to display, because there's going to be no other way to get that information. And now we get a Chevrolet minivan. There we go. Now, in addition, I'd like to show the price. This is where we have a bit of a conundrum. Like I said before, the only thing that's going to come over is whatever we put in value. Now I could take some options here. I know that each of these particular styles, the model, have a particular price set with them. The user would have seen that when they were filling out the form. But that information was simply not sent over. There's a couple different ways we could go about actually sending that information in one form or another. Probably what would work out best, though, at least simplest for our cases, is just examine what the model is and pick something based on that. So I'm going to write here, compute the base price by simply looking at what came over as the model, knowing that there were only certain options and they all have a particular price associated with them. Now this is not necessarily the best way to do it, but it'll get the job done for us. Let's take a look at the value that we got for model. We could build a big long if-else-if change, but this is a case where we really want to use a switch statement. If you haven't seen these before, it's basically just a shorthand for a big long if, else if, else if, else. Hopefully you have had some experience with them, but if not, you can imagine how this would be written out in a big if, else, if statement. For switches, you specify what you want to do for each possible case, and the cases are the different values that it might take on. In this case, minivan is 1, and it would be a string. And then you would specify what you want it to do, and you would end the case with a break statement like that. And so let's duplicate this. We want SUV, crossover. This is where I wish I hadn't supplied quite so many options because it makes the work a little long here. SUV, crossover, then we had what? Pickup, sedan, and coupe. Pickup, sedan, and coupe. With each of these cases, I'd like to have a price. So let's initialize a variable first. This is important to be 0, and then let's fill it in. And actually, I'm going to call this base price because that's the base model price. So we'll say $base price equals, and what should it equal for the minivan? It should equal 18,000. Now type it in just as a raw number. Don't put the dollar signs and commas and things in there. We want just a number here. So 18,000 there. Pretty reasonable for a minivan. What else have we got? We've got 25,000, 22,000. I'm just going to get these in here really quick. And then we had another 18, right? 18 and 13 for the coupe. 18 and 13. There we go. So this is going to examine the model and pick an appropriate price based on how they were. And so we've got our particular make and model here, and then we will also output base price. Base price is equal to $base price. And there we go. It picked 18,000. Now we're going to have to deal with currency quite a bit here on this page. I'm going to actually go ahead and try and make these look the way we'd like them to. There are some functions that you can use if you Google around through PHP, but really we can do this ourselves manually. I'm going to create another function up here. So let's call this function money. And it's going to take in a value, and its job will simply be to return a string representation of that as if it were American money, so American dollars. To do that, we're going to use the number format function. Now, you were required to use this in your homework. Hopefully you're comfortable with how it works. Basically, you give it the value first, then you tell it how many decimal places you want it to have, and additionally you can adjust things like commas and other such. Basically, this will convert the number into a string with that many decimal places. Currency, I want it to have 2 decimal places. That's how we always do it. The next thing we'd want to do is we'd want to return that string, but it needs to have a $sign on the front of it. So we would return $sign, and we basically want to concatenate on the rest of the string. But I've told you before that plus doesn't work in PHP. It doesn't actually concatenate things. You have to use a period, in fact. This does string concatenation. This says $sign concatenated with val. Now, I'm doing this because I'm not doing an echo. If I was doing an echo, I might just want to separate them by commas. I'd already shown you that works just fine with echo. But here I actually want to build the bigger string. I'm going to go ahead and put this in parentheses too so that we understand this is happening before it actually returns the value. So this is going to take this in and format it to look like American currency. And because we've stuck with the default things for number format, it will put in commas where it's appropriate for things like the thousand separator. So we can come down here now to where we output that base price. And what we actually want to do here is process it with money. Because this is an echo, I'm going to do multi-lines here and just say money base price. We have to do that. You can't do anything other than just a raw variable name in the middle of a string. And then put that in there as well. And there we go. Look at that. All of a sudden it looks like a currency, just what we want. One of the last things I want to do here is I'd kind of like to gather all the totals over at the right, just like a receipt normally would be. I'm going to apply a special class to it using a span. Now remember, a span is used if you want to keep the style in line. And the particular class I want to apply, I'm going to use single quotes here because I've already inside of a double quotes thing. The particular class I want to apply is pull right. This is a special bootstrap class that basically takes whatever you put between it and pulls it all the way over to the right side of the page, or whatever is containing it, in fact. And there we go. That pulls that base price over to the right. Quick and easy little trick. From here on out, we're going to do a lot of this same kind of processing. I've already got most of this code prepared, so I'm just going to go ahead and grab it. You can examine it on your own in the final code that you saw that you'll be able to access on the web page. So here we want to display the options they selected, and we also want to add in some prices for each of these options. I'm going to do this with a list. Now, as I said before, we never really confirmed that there were any options in this, so we have to do that. And I do that just by checking whether or not options is empty. I also want to add up the price of these options so I can add it on at a later time. So first we're going to output the actual line in the receipt, just like we had up here, base price. This one's going to be optional extras. And then underneath that we have our unordered list that will list out each of the options. And they will always cost $200 because every one of them costs $200. So we list them all out, we add $200. And we do this going through all the different options in the array. I'll also point out here that I am using a for each loop. This is very similar to the for each function that we had on arrays. The syntax is only slightly different. You simply say options as the thing I'm going through as current option, the actual variable name of the individual options as you go through them. And then you can use that in here. We perfectly fine to use a for array that used an I iterator variable as well if you prefer that. Let's save this. And currently it won't show anything because we didn't have any options selected. Let's go ahead and go on back here and do that. So we're going to do Chevy minivan, and let's throw in some options. Let's see if this is working. Oh! So something is not correct here. My variable options seems to be empty. I can tell that because it's not printing out anything. It would at least print out optional extras as long as the variable wasn't empty. Now why is that? Well, first things first, I can take a look up here and see how it's being created. Am I using the right variable name? Double click and see that it highlights that, and yes, the same variable name is being used here, here, and here. They all match up. Cur option also matches up. That's not an issue. So the last thing that we can really look at here is like, well, am I grabbing the right thing out of post? To do that, I've got to go over and look at the form. And I can see here, if I come down to where the options were selected, that I'm not. It was called option without an S. So I need to take that off. Now let's save this, and there they are. They show up. So the base price is $18,000. It's now listing through the optional extras, collision avoidance, XM radio, and premium audio. That's all wonderful stuff. So there we go. Simple problem. A little tricky to solve though because it was not anything that PHP could have checked. It was giving me exactly what I asked it for. I was just asking for the wrong thing. It's called a logic error, and those are always a little trickier to debug. The next thing we need to do is we need to actually go through and add up. The next thing we need to do is we need to go through and add up the actual cost of the final car and display a final total to them. So we will compute tax and total for the user. New. To do that, we are going to set some variables. Let's compute tax. Tax we're going to just say is a flat 5.5%. So before we do that, actually, let's compute a subtotal, right? We almost always want to display that on the receipt somewhere. That's going to be the base price plus the option price that I computed up here. And that's our subtotal. Tax is going to be equal to subtotal times whatever the tax is. In this case, we're going to do 5.5%. Remember, if it's a percentage, divide it by 100 in order to get it into the value you would multiply by, and that'll get us the tax. And then finally, we want the total cost, which is going to be the subtotal plus the tax. Now, let's display all of this to the user. So we would want to basically output something very similar to what we did up here for base price. So I'm going to copy that. We'll show subtotal, and again pass into money, $, subtotal. There we go. And then we'll also show tax. And we'll let them know that it is 5.5%. So we'll just include that in the output. And then we have $tax. And then finally, let's output to them the final total cost. And this is a little more important, so let's put it up the chain of headers here. Total, let's take out the 5.5%, and we'll just say $total cost was what I called it. Save this, and there we are. Here is our receipt. The base price was $18,000. We got 3 extras, which was an additional $600. At 5.5% tax, we have $1,023 worth of tax. And here's the total. So there we go. This is our basic sort of processing. We go through, there's really no single recipe for validating form data. You process it and you kind of validate it as you go. And if you see problems, you roll with them as they happen. The basic checks are making sure that they use the proper request method and that the things are defined that you have to have defined. This is just like the required that we put in an HTML form previously. Now, one last thing I'm going to add in here is a final sort of couple buttons for the user to be able to submit these, sort of quote-unquote submit the final selections. These buttons are just going to go down to the bottom. They're not PHP, so we'll do them after we exit PHP the last time and still in the main section. So what are these going to do? The first one will go back. What I want it to do is basically go back and let them edit the order if they have changed their mind. So let's save this. Right here, they're sort of confirming their final order, and they could want to go back and edit it. I'm going to put one more break in there, BR. There we go, I like that better. They might want to edit the order. The easiest way to do that would be to just click the back button. When we do the back button, the form stays filled out. Browsers just do that. They know that you would probably want to go back to see that form again. So I'd like to simulate hitting the back button. This is actually best done with JavaScript. So I create a little on-click event that says history.back, and that simulates hitting the back button. So after they've submitted the order over here, if they hit edit order, it simulates hitting the back button, comes right back where they were. That's just a little trick for you. If they are done and want to do it all again, then we would just want to link them right back to where they were. So we're actually creating an A tag on this. Might seem a little weird. Why does it look like a button? Well, that's just a little bit of Bootstrap trickery. It's an A element. We're pulling it to the right, but we're also saying it's a button and it's a primary button. And so Bootstrap makes it look like a button, which is kind of cool. Where do we go? Well, we just go back to index.html. That's where they originally made their order. So let's interact with this a little bit so that you see what's really going on. I'm going to refresh this to make sure we've got a raw thing. If we submit this right off the bat, we're going to get an error. Make and model are required. Please resubmit your order. So we got to go back to put in a new order. Let's put in the make. If I submit that, then I get Chevy minivan. Base price was $18,000, so that's the subtotal. Tax is 5.5%. Adds it all up. Let's say I was like, oops, I wanted to put some options in there. I can hit edit order, come back and add some options. Air conditioning, collision avoidance, premium audio. Sounds good. We come back here again. The receipt is now modified to include those options, adds them all up, computes the tax. There's our final total. Let's say I'm done and now I'd like to order a new car. I hit new order, I come back to a blank form, ready to go. Let's do a Ford sedan this time with supplemental airbags. Submit. There we go. So this is the basic process. Here we are validating this data when we send it, and we're processing it to generate a unique response. This is that relationship. Data that originated from the client has now been sent to the server. The server validates that data, and here we're just using it to generate a response. But you can imagine if we had a more complete system, we would actually store this order, send it off for processing, start making their car, basically. That would be the next step in the chain.